One thing that you said in an interview, which just blew my mind because I saw so much of myself in it, was
Okay.
you said most people when they come up with the arguments that they have for politics, they don't learn their arguments from the people who think differently to them. They go straight to the sources that perfectly agree with them, and then they take those arguments, right?
Oh
And I
yeah.
was like, oh my gosh, how many times do I like think that I have a strong argument because I've listened to some guy or some girl who's like saying exactly what I want them to hear, and then as soon as I get into that discussion, I'm just shut down immediately, right? Like, how do you? I think a lot of people are actually after this, and I'm after this answer as well. How does a person rationally and thoughtfully work through coming up with what they actually believe politically to the
Yeah.
extent that they can? I mean, I know that there's a lot of biology there that like can to
Yeah.
some extent determine what you're going to think politically, but yeah, to the extent that
And
they can, how can they do that?
yeah, so it's a hard process, and one of them is right. This read widely principle, which
Mm-hmm.
is look. There's a John Stuart Mill's on Liberty has got a great line, which is those who don't know the arguments for the other side don't understand his own, those who don't understand their own views.
Yeah.
If you, and so the thought is there's a deep version of this and a sort of a shallow version, and both of them look like they're able to get plenty of. The deep version is that every view is really intelligible dialectically as part of a conversation, and
Mm.
so the reason why we say most of the things we do, the reason why we propose certain things, is because of the fact that they're the products of a sort of a long, ongoing process of this view being the right thing to say now.
Mm.
And so, understanding the conversation that's yielded the view, and that means understanding the critical relationship to a contrary. And
Mm.
so that's the sort of the deep version of the view that political views have got, the political and really pretty much any view has kind of got that dialectical background that makes it so
Mm.
that its content is what it is.
Yeah.
The weaker version of the view, now that's the sort of the philosophical heavy breathing about what meaning is and things like that, and that's controversial. The less
Yeah.
controversial and weaker version one is that the best way to really comprehend your view is to be able to see the reasons for it. And
Mm.
to see the reasons for it is to see what the quality of the reasons for it are. That you don't really. So understanding something isn't just sort of seeing what makes it true. It's seeing why it's true, what its
Mm.
consequences are, right? That's what really understanding is. And so being able to see that means that you need to be able to see ways that it could be false,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Why these reasons support that explain why certain other alternatives are not correct. And
Yeah.
so that understanding is something. So then that's a sort of a more of a kind of a theory of what understanding is.
Mm.
Understanding is what the sort of the relevant contraries are and why this one and not those other ones.
Mm.
Um, and so and so one of the nice things about whatever that is that you have to understand the contraries not from the perspective of your view, right? The contraries from the perspective of your view are all going to look false,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so that's not really understanding them, right? They just that seeing what might make them look true,
Mm.
as seeing them as false doesn't do that. Seeing them from the inside, and that requires a kind of plasticity of mind
Yeah.
that you work up by reading things and hearing things from the perspective of folks that you don't agree with.
Mm.
And there's something dangerous with that. Anyone who's seen The Lord of the Rings or read The Lord of the Rings knows that the White Wizard Saruman is interested in Sauron, and he talks with him, and then he gets converted.
Yeah.
Right? And
Yeah.
this is the worry that all of my academic friends have with me. I have a regimen, and I think of it as a regimen.
Mhm.
I read widely,
Yeah.
and I listen widely, and that means that my media consumption involves not really far right wing, but pretty
Mhm.
far right wing stuff here in the States, and
Yeah.
also pretty far left wing stuff here
Yeah.
in the States. And what regularly happens is that I tell people that, and they're like, "Aren't you worried that they're going to convince you of something?" And I'm like, a little bit, right? I can't help it. It was like, I like my views, and so if I change my mind, I'm going to be getting views that I don't like, but I'll like them, right?
Yeah.
But this is kind of
If
how
they're correct, right? Like if it's correct, there's nothing bad about believing something that is true, right? Because it's true.
Right. If they've got and the thought is that I've got relatively good critical thinking skills, I think, and so I don't think that I'm going to get blown over by some sort of rhetorical gust of wind or something like that.
Yeah.
But that's right. So are you worried like that? Right, Sauron going and sort of listening to Sauron for a little bit. Their names are too close, but the White Wizard going and listening to the sort of element of all evil and then getting convinced by him.
Yeah.
That's the worry that often gets put out. But it turns out that, I mean, we'll put it this way. I mean, for the most part, a lot of the discourse out there is really sham argument anyhow. And so once you sort of show up with this, like, okay, look, I'm really looking for an argument. I'm looking for a really good case for what we're looking for. It turns out that there's a lot of arguing, but not a lot of argument, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I think that makes perfect sense. Yeah, it's almost as if, like, you know, when you look at it from the perspective of looking at the crowd, right? The crowd is very angry right now. Like, a lot of people are just back and forth. Like, nobody thinks that anybody else has a valid argument. But what you're saying is we need to get back to that really respectful discourse kind of. And I watched a debate recently between two intellectuals, and it was like Marxism versus capitalism sort of thing, right? Okay. And I went into it thinking very much like, oh, I know exactly what I'm going to be thinking throughout this whole debate. But what I saw was two people who were just genuinely trying to have a really good understanding between the two of them, right? And I was convinced of many arguments on both sides, and not necessarily convinced, but I might say very interested in both arguments. And I think that's the result, right, of having a good conversation that is based on the idea that we want to understand something. We don't want to be right? We want to understand something new here. And is that kind of the difference between like an argument and just arguing?
I agree. Yeah, I think that's right. I think that there are two components to it. One of them is, again, the sort of the spirit with which you do it. Yeah. But I think there's another one, and it's kind of like with any. We'll just kind of analogize this with relationships for a moment. And again, it's not perfect. It's not a perfect analogy, but at the very least, it's a good one. Which is, think of all the bad ways that you were good. That like you had your heart was in the right place with your first love. But think of just how bad you were at being a boyfriend then. Right? Yeah. I truly loved my first my first love. But I was just a sucky boyfriend. I was just bad at it, right? Yeah. Because I didn't have the skills of expressing myself. I didn't really know exactly how to be truly respectful of another person. I was doing my best to be respectful, but I just kind of sucked at it, right? Yeah. And why? Because I didn't have any practice. Like this is my first time. This is my first time being in a loving relationship, and so I kind of sucked at it. I just was not good at it, and it took me a couple girlfriends before I got to the point where it was like, yeah, it turns out that I'm an okay boyfriend now, right? And it turns out that it's exactly the same. And I took things personally, and all these sorts of things, right? And it turns out that kind of set of skills, personal skills, argumentative skills, skills of being able to let folks know what you need, let folks know where when you've heard enough, and all that other stuff to be able to understand what they're doing. All of those skills are ones that require a lot of practice, and it requires actually. And one of the benefits that I had in my household was that my mom and dad were really good to each other. And I was still bad at being a boyfriend, even though I had a father who was a really exemplary husband. But imagine how bad I would have been if my father was not good to my mother. And so what we need are people who set those examples and also allow us lots and lots of opportunities to be bad at it, but not hold it against us. Yeah. And so again, this is the reason why classrooms are so important. This is the reason why online discussions are ones where it's like, if you screw up in an online discussion or something like that, you've got to be like, look, don't hold it against folks. Why? Because of the fact that we're trying to get better, right?
Yeah.